Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man who starts a woodworking class gets a visit from someone who has intentions of doing more than just cutting wood. So, if you need work done, make sure not to call the copycat carpenter.
For a few years, I've worked as a private contractor. My grandfather taught me to be a woodworker, carpenter. Grandma used to say I could properly use a dowel before I could talk, but I think they might have exaggerated a bit. Still, I love making things with my hands. That passion has given me quite a lot over the years. A family, a home, a steady job, a 68-foot Dodge Charger. What more can you ask for? That is, until not too long ago, when I got a bit more than I asked for. When the COVID pandemic hit, there were a lot of people who lost their jobs. My firm was pretty much fine, as people needed to fix up their houses to make it through an entire year indoors. There was also a rising interest in custom furniture, so we got a lot of special orders. I felt kind of bad that we were doing so well, so I decided I wanted to do something to give back to the community. So, for those people who lost their jobs, I decided to start a woodworking class. My wife loved it. I got to use the wood shop at a local high school after just a few short talks with the principal. I put up flyers around town, posted some ads on social media, and asked my daughters to spread the word in their class. We still made sure to adhere to safety standards, so there could only be 10 people at a time, and we were spread out far and wide. It took me less than a month to put it all together, and sooner than I realized, I was a teacher. It was easier than I thought it'd be. As soon as I started talking about what I loved, I was unstoppable. One by one, I asked my students what they wanted to make. Robert, an older man, wanted to make a pool cue. Donna, a stay-at-home mom, wanted to make a patterned rolling pin. Everyone had their own idea. Then there was Roy. Roy was somewhere in his 40s. He was skinny, had a slight limp, and a face that just screamed that he'd been punched a few times too many. He had a surprisingly deep voice with rolling R's, black hair like a wet crow. "So what do you want to make, Roy?" I asked. "Any ideas?"
What do you want?
He asked back.
Me? I'd make a...
He surprised me, but I thought about it. I tried to figure out something that a guy like Roy could make use of. I thought about a baseball bat or something sporty, but he didn't seem like the type. I winged it. "A shoehorn," I said. "What do you think?"
Maybe.
He nodded.
A shoehorn.
"Or maybe a spice rack?" I continued, weighing his reaction. "Paint it something nice, something that matches your kitchen,"
Then I'll make a spice rack.
said Roy, rolling the R in rack. That's how our first class started. I went through the tools, and everyone was free to bring their materials over to the shop to make their project. They could also make them at home and come in for feedback. It was all very casual and free-form. Most of them were excited, and I had a few talks about what tools to use, what to look for, and even what channels to check out online. We started making step-by-step plans to finish our projects in time for our 5th and final session. During all this time, Roy didn't do anything. He didn't make any plans, he didn't make any sketches, he never asked any questions. He just stood there, nodding his head, rolling his R's. Sure, he was going to make a spice rack, he said, but he had nothing to show for it. 5 sessions came and went, and everyone had something to present. Robert finished his pool cue, and Donna made an amazing star pattern for her rolling pin. Roy, on the other hand, had nothing. "Didn't you finish your project?" I asked.
I did.
He said.
I just didn't bring it.
Again, that rolling R in bring made me shiver, not in the good way.
We'd love to see it.
Robert said.
It's okay if it isn't perfect.
But it is.
Nodded Roy.
It is perfect.
He rolled the R in perfect just a little bit too long. Robert was clearly uncomfortable. Once my first group of students finished, the next batch signed up. A lot of younger folks this time, a majority under 18. And to my surprise, a return student, Roy. While Julianne and Greg wanted to make a chessboard and a wall shelf, Roy didn't want to make anything. Instead, he just asked me again.
What do you want to make?
This time I said a ladder, a tool, something practical. Roy agreed. The weeks passed one after another, and the same thing happened. Roy kept showing up empty-handed, while the other students just looked at him funny. Greg made his shelf from solid oak, and Julianne made her chessboard from birch. Roy, on the other hand, just listened to my instructions and took notes. He really seemed like he wanted to make something, but he just never did. As I started my third batch of students, Roy came along for the third time. Again, he asked,
What do you want to make?
At this point, I was frustrated. I'd make a tool shed, Roy, I said, to put all my other projects in. He lit up with a smile and nodded. I could have said spaceship. He still would have agreed. The other students noticed something was up, and 2 of them didn't come to the second session. 2 more dropped out by the third. By the end of the final session, it was just me, Roy, and 3 people who had nothing to show. They were eager to leave, and I didn't feel like stopping them. Finally, there was only me and Roy left as I cleaned up. As I put away the sign-up sheets, he sat down across from me with a big smile on his face.
I finished it.
He said, and finished what?
The tool shed.
Right, is that where you keep the spice rack and ladder?
Yes.
I laughed, but he didn't. I waited for him to tell me it was a joke. But he was dead serious. He stayed silent, watching me. You're serious, I said. You actually made it, didn't you?
Yes.
He nodded.
Want to go see?
I don't think so, Roy. No offense, but I'm not sure we're that close.
Okay.
He said. As casually as picking up a pack of gum, he suddenly pointed a gun at me.
I want you to see. I need feedback.
It is a strange feeling being so casually threatened. You don't realize the danger at first. Mortality is just this fleeting, abstract concept until you stare down the barrel of a loaded handgun. Suddenly, you remember that you can die. We took my 68 Charger. Roy was slightly larger than I thought, and he had to lean back the passenger seat to fit his legs. Even without pointing the gun at me, I could almost feel it, like a heat radiating towards me. Roy seemed overall pretty calm about the whole thing, but my mind was racing. What was I supposed to do? Ram the car into a tree? I couldn't decide, and before I knew it, we'd been on the road for over an hour. Roy pointed at an exit and told me to follow a dirt road. I could feel my phone buzzing like crazy. My family was getting worried. He still hadn't asked me to turn it off. Maybe they could track me. The road just seemed to go further and further downward. I had to crawl at a slow pace just to spare the suspension. After about 20 minutes, there were more roots and boulders than actual road. The phone stopped buzzing. We were off the grid. I parked the car and stepped out at Roy's instruction. Using a small flashlight, he showed me the way forward. We were deep in the forest, but I could barely hear a single bird. A few chickadees at most.
My sister gets me the materials. She's very resourceful.
Every rolling R seemed to be on the edge of turning into a growl. I peeked behind me only to see the gun pointing straight at me.
Eyes forward.
He said.
I want your honest first impression.
I could have sworn his eyes were red. At first, I didn't notice the clearing in the woods. There was a strange metallic smell in the air, strong enough for me to taste it. Still no birds, no insects, just a breeze sweeping through the trees.
There,
said Roy.
my tool shed.
The flashlight fell upon something. It looked nothing like a tool shed. In many ways, it looked like nothing I'd ever seen before. Something started boiling up inside of me. That's not wood,
No,
said Roy.
it isn't.
I had to look away, but I felt the gun push me forward.
Look!
I looked. Bones, sinew, muscle, and cartilage. A big, grotesque, hollow square. Every single detail was a nightmare itself. The skin draped over the door was the last straw for me, and I fell to my knees, covering my face with my hand. Again, the cold steel of a gun pushed against me.
We need you to look at 2 more things.
Oh God, the spice rack, the ladder. Stepping into that tool shed was like walking into hell. Most of the materials were dry, and there wasn't a single insect anywhere near. With nothing but Roy's flashlight, I only caught quick glimpses of the interior. I tried looking away, but the presence of that gun was enough to force my eyes forward.
There, the spice rack.
He said, "Please, I saw rows of bony fingers, arranged like they were holding cups, femurs arranged like a ladder. I blinked and turned around to plead for my sanity. Roy wasn't himself. He was at least a foot taller, and his hair had grown longer. He smiled with anticipation, his eyes reflecting a clear shade of red. Small white fragments poked out of his hairline, like pin feathers of a bird, or sharp nails. His fingers seemed longer.
You're useless.
He growled, rolling his tongue.
This was a mistake.
I had to think of something, say something, anything. The shoehorn? I gasped.
What shoehorn?
The first day, I said a shoehorn or a spice rack. Did you ever make the shoehorn?
I could.
Then show me. In an instant, he grabbed my arm, pushed me to the ground, and placed his knee on my back. He was going to break my arm. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice. He was going to make a shoehorn out of my shoulder blade. Wood! You need to make it out of wood! I pleaded. That's the rule.
I make the rules.
He grinned. You're so used to a single material. A true craftsman needs to be able to work a variety of materials. Birch, pine, oak, willow, all kinds.
I can make things you can only dream of.
He bent my arm further like he was trying to snap a carrot. Then do it. Make one. Pine wood, there's plenty of it to go around. He stopped. With a sigh, he let go and stepped off.
Fine.
He moaned.
Wait, Hera.
He pushed me into the shed and closed the door. I fell to the floor, complete darkness. It was like a nest, covered in branches, mud and grass. In fact, it smelled more like mud and grass than anything else. I couldn't help but wonder how something so grotesque could be almost completely without smell. It should have stunk like hell in there, but it didn't. A faint whiff of iron, that was it. The first thing I tried was my phone, but it was no help. There was no reception, and the light did nothing but to bring my nightmares to life. I couldn't stand to see my surroundings, but feeling the walls blindly didn't help either. I couldn't see any weak spots, but I couldn't feel any either. I was stuck. The door was locked. I don't even know how, but I couldn't budge it. The entire shed was sturdy, using some sort of spine, dug into the ground as support. I tried feeling my way out in the dark, but all it did was give me an inner picture of what I was actually standing in. After a while, it got so dark that I didn't know if I was closing my eyes or not. I lost track of the door. It all just felt wrong. How can you differentiate a door from a wall when all you see and feel is dry meat and bone? I tried everything. Putting support on my back, I sat down and tried kicking to find weak spots. I tried the ceiling, I tried lifting, wedging, leverage. Nothing. The shed wouldn't budge. It felt like I struggled for an eternity, but it had probably just been an hour. Light or no light, I couldn't get out. My phone just sat there in my hands, useless. I felt it in my chest. That black sinking anxiety of the cold. That feeling when you think you're about to die. I must have sat there frozen for hours. I snapped to attention when I heard a sound outside. It was smaller, careful. Tiny steps. Hello, anyone there? I called out with a dry voice.
And?
It was a boy. Just some boy, in the middle of nowhere. And all he had to say was, "and." I pushed the confusion away, feeling a hope light up. Hey kid, I smiled. You out there? Can you open the door?
And then?
I paused to think. What the hell was this? And then we can go away. You want ice cream? We can get that. We can get whatever you want. Pizza?
And then?
I was about to explode on this kid. He had this infuriating tone, like he was mocking me. Then, suddenly, the door opened. He had the same dark hair as Roy, but was no more than 10 to 13 years old. The same red eyes, the same pale complexion. He was dragging some sort of blue plastic garbage bag.
And then?
He asked again. I don't know what you want. What? I looked around. The coast was clear. I couldn't leave him there. I tried picking him up, but he recoiled. He shook his head and stepped away.
And then?
He said,
And then,
We have to go, I whispered, and come on,
and then,
he said matter-of-factly. He stepped inside the shed and closed the door. I just started running. My car wasn't far off, and I was far quicker on the way back than I'd been getting there. The keys were still in the ignition. The Charger seemed just as eager to get me out of those woods as I'd been getting out of that shed. Together we turned around and drove like maniacs back to the main road. I didn't care about the boulders, roots, vines, and bushes. I had to go, and I had to go now. With a beaten suspension, we managed to get to the main road. I stepped on the gas. I'd rather die in a car crash than anywhere near Roy and his creations. What happened next was a blur. I was pulled over by a highway patrol who noticed I was in shock. I gave a statement about a kidnapping. Trying to explain what I'd seen just made the deputy shake his head. Maybe he didn't believe me, or maybe he'd heard this before. Either way, he made very few notes, barely took my name. I've since shut down that class, and I'm being treated for a stress disorder. I get these stomach cramps, and I have to sleep with the lights on. I have to see that I'm out of that hellhole with my own eyes. When the light disappears, I can't be sure anymore. I'm gonna see a therapist about it soon enough. I've gotten a few recommendations. Not sure I like the idea of overexposure therapy, but whatever works. I haven't heard anything about an investigation, but there have been no reports of murders nearby. Not to the extent that you could build a shed out of the remains, or a spice rack, or a ladder. Wherever Roy got his materials, it must have been from somewhere else. Maybe that kid knew. I think about him a lot. I get the feeling that he wasn't there to rescue me, so much as to just put away that plastic bag of his. But Roy's still out there. That I'm certain of. After all, he sent me a shoehorn in the mail a few weeks ago.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man working for a preservation zone learns that the cubs he's watching might be in more danger than just poachers. So, what have you ate? Because I know of that which eats lions.
There are 3 times as many lions in captivity as there are in the wild. That's an uncomfortable fact, but it also leaves the question, where the hell are all these lions? Sure, there are zoos, there are animal sanctuaries, there are even private breeders, similar to those of Netflix fame. Then there are preservation zones. Not many people know of these. There are less than a dozen in the US, and most of them are used for various kinds of endangered species. There's one in Florida that is exclusively for tigers. A small one in Oklahoma used for elephants. Then there is one in Arkansas, the Wren and Collin Panther Zone, the RCPZ. They keep lions. That's where I work. It is time we spoke about it. A lot of people haven't heard about this, and I think that is by design. The area is a lot larger than it needs to be, and most of it is wetland. When I started, there were in total about 30 lions separated into 3 prides. The lions were confined to 3 indoor shelters and a large caged outdoor space. There were veterinarians on site at every hour of the day, and a total of 45 employees on rotation. I was a part of the handlers, the group of employees with the highest overturn and the least insight. This is where it gets weird. The RCPZ has literal acres of wetlands that is seemingly unused. It just sits there. The shelter and caged area takes up less than a 1/7 of the total space. Lions aren't meant to wander around in swamps anyway, so why even have this area set up? I didn't question it too much at first. I started working there in 2016. I was part of a team of 4 handlers, working with the second pride. 2 grown males, 5 females, 6 cubs. The largest group of lions we had. I came straight out of high school, working my way up to a Ford veterinary school. I've always loved the big cats, and I heard about the RCPZ completely by accident. The area has literally no online presence, and they never put out ads when they look for new people. To this day, I still have no idea if they are privately owned or not. I think it might be government owned, but I don't know. I found the RCPZ when driving through the wetlands with my buddy. We were running out of gas and desperately looking for a gas station when we found a wall along a stretch of forest. Along the wall, every 30 yards or so, was a small metal plate describing it as the Wren and Collin Pantherin Zone. I was curious and came back the next day. I followed the wall as far as I could and happened upon the main building. I was looking for a job, and there it was. The rest is history. My interviewer told me that the RCPZ was off the grid for a reason. Apparently, back in the 80s, there were serious cutbacks. Since then, there's been a policy to keep non-essential costs to a minimum. So, both electronics and digital equipment is more or less unheard of. The entire shelter is supposed to be able to run for at least a month, independently of the outside world, with no power or internet connection. I started working after 2 weeks of training. I mostly prepared meals and helped the vets monitor the cats with more serious health conditions. One of the males was getting old, the king of the pride. In all files and folders, he was referred to as T01, so we called him Toy. Sweetest old cat you can imagine, not a violent bone in his body. He would actually purr when he saw the handlers. It sounded like someone trying to start a lawnmower. As he got older, the vets informed us that there was nothing more we could do. It would be a matter of weeks before he simply couldn't walk anymore. His quality of life would drop, and he'd be in constant pain. They suggested that he be put down. This completely changed the atmosphere among the staff. I was not supposed to be part of the handlers who took Toy to his final resting place, but we had a staff shortage that day. My supervisor, Danielle, was in tears. She described to me that this was the hardest part of the job, but that we all had to take solace in the fact that Toy had lived a long and carefree life. The other handlers had to coax her out of the bathroom. She locked herself in there and cried until lunch. When it was time, we barely had to do anything. Toy was so happy to see us, he willingly came along. Except we weren't going back to the vets. We walked out the back of the chain link fence towards the wetlands. Looking at the other handlers, I knew better than to ask questions. They'd gone quiet. Toy could sense that something was wrong, and he tried his best to comfort us. He'd poke us with the tip of his nose, as if to ask us what was going on. We walked for at least 35 minutes, following old trails deeper into the wetlands. We had to stop at times to make sure Toy could keep up. He was losing parts of his mane by now, and he was clearly in pain. Sweet old man. Finally, we came to this big lake. I noticed there were several logs and trees around there with odd marks, as if hit by lightning or clawed by an animal. Danielle took Toy aside and asked the rest of us to start walking back. I wanted to say that we couldn't just leave her there with the lion, but no one else protested. I just looked at the others, who shook their heads. This wasn't a good time for questions. We did as we were told and walked away. Toy watched us curiously, but stayed with Danielle. As we left them behind, I looked at the other two handlers. Before I could even find the words, they interrupted me. "Don't look," one of them said. "Just accept it." A few minutes later, the ground started rumbling. The handlers said it was swamp gas, but I wasn't convinced. Swamp gas doesn't roar. It doesn't make the ground move. Also, it doesn't suddenly just stop, does it? That day changed the way I looked at my job. I started asking a few too many questions and reading a few too many documents. For example, there were at least 6 different academic papers on the Panthera atrox going around the facility. The North American lion, they went extinct thousands of years ago. The funny thing about it is that I can't find any of those papers online or their authors. I'm pretty sure most of them were written on site by the veterinarians. There were, of course, lots of areas I wasn't allowed in. Doors with reinforced locks and armed guards. Our ID badges were color-coded to show which corridors we were allowed to go through. And stepping out of bounds was grounds for immediate termination. The armed guards were not friendly. If anything, they could be a bit overzealous. Handlers and veterinarians were to be considered untrustworthy. So the default attitude of the guards was to doubt us and double-check our intentions. This made it hard to step out of bounds. I stayed at the RCPZ. Every time a lion would get too old or too wounded, it would be taken into the wetlands, never to return. Only the senior handlers were allowed to go out back. The rest of us were limited to the shelter and cage. Since we weren't understaffed again, I usually just watched Danielle and the other seniors lead the lion out the back from afar. It happened surprisingly often, at least once every 2 months. There was an incident in October of 2018. Danielle was taking R04, or Roy, out to the wetlands. She was gone longer than anticipated. Then the entire facility was put on lockdown. Every single armed guard got automatic weapons from the armory, and handlers were instructed to put all the lions back in the indoor shelter. There was a siren blaring, the kind you manually hand crank. The guards made sure no one entered or left the facility, but they didn't have the manpower to see what we were doing. Most of the handlers stayed in the lunchroom, but I took the opportunity to look around. One of the veterinarians left their keys in their overcoat, making it easy for me to borrow them for a while. I started looking through the administrative area, folder after folder of papers regarding prehistoric Ice Age creatures, mostly lions and bears. There was also a schedule posted on one of the walls where it said which lion was to be taken into the feeding ground and at what time. October of every year was marked in red ink as if to show that it was a particularly important time. We weren't allowed cell phones on the premises, or I'd have shared all of it here with you. The one thing that stood out the most was the many mentions of Tapex. At first I thought it was some kind of brand, but it was mentioned in several papers as well. The Tapex was some kind of prehistoric Ice Age creature, the true apex, that which eats lions, one paper was titled. We were locked in for the rest of the day. Danielle didn't come back, neither did Roy. Several guards mysteriously quit on the same day. It was a mess, and no one was telling us anything about it. Senior handler Lauren was promoted to supervisor, and there were a lot of changes. The veterinarians told us we had to triple the number of prides. 2 more enclosures were to be built, and the caged area had to be doubled in size. More lions were to be imported, and during construction, it was up to the handlers to make sure they could all live in close proximity. It was hell. Imagine 4 literal alpha creatures all competing, and you're supposed to be the referee to step up when things got too rough. We had to be on 24-hour surveillance, and some of the more aggressive creatures had to be sedated regularly. Even the calmer lions were agitated by the new arrivals. We were stressed to the brim, each and every one of us. It took us months to get things in order. We managed it, but it took a lot more effort than it should have. We were just pushed too far for weeks on end, and most of us were ready to quit. Then came a pay raise, increased vacation days, and finally, the pandemic. When the COVID pandemic struck, most of us realized it'd be near impossible to get another job working with animals like this. The amount of lions being put out to pasture nearly tripled. Instead of once every 2 months, it was once every 3 or 4 weeks. The veterinarians kept referencing a brood and an updated containment protocol, but we were kept in the dark about the details. They were getting careless, and the word Tapex was getting thrown around more openly. Then came February 2021. I usually went home around 6 p.m. when the night crew arrived, so I was getting ready to leave. We were grooming one of the lionesses and cleaning up the shelter when the alarm went off, 5:45. The armed guards panicked. They told us we needed to bring out 3 lions immediately. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. 3 perfectly healthy lions were to be brought out and killed. The entire handler staff had to go out, me included. The lions weren't cooperating, and we had to force them out with catch-all poles. I was scared out of my mind. These big cats growling and snarling, as we had to force them out through openings in the chain-link fence. Armed guards with itchy trigger fingers. I was keeping madness at bay with a literal stick. It was getting dark, but a few of us had brought flashlights. I was one of them. My hands cramped around the catch-all as this massive animal protested and pulled against 4 handlers trying to hold it off. The only other lights we had were the flashlights attached to the automatic weapons of the armed escort. Something was moving in the wetlands. Something big. I barely got a glimpse of it, but I saw scales. More movement, smaller. The lions were freaking out. The lioness in the far front, held back by 5 grown and trained handlers, was jumping and rolling. It was desperately trying to get away, meowing, screaming in protest, almost snapping its own neck. The second lion, an adolescent male, was getting aggressive. The lioness we were escorting in the back just stopped, frozen in fear. She looked back at us, as if pleading for us to release her. The tapex struck. The lioness in the front was swept along by a wave of scale and teeth, instantly sinking back into the swamp. The catch-all was dragged along, and one of the handlers who were too slow to let go was dragged into the swamp. Once he got loose, I heard nothing but a short yell before he was pulled beneath the surface. He didn't come back up. It was chaos. The handlers in front of us dropped the adolescent male, who took off down the path. After about 30 feet, it just disappeared with a pained yelp. The handlers were freaking out. The armed guards were screaming at us to keep moving, to keep quiet, and to turn off our flashlights. Erica, one of the handlers, just took off running back towards the shelter. I heard a series of gunshots. For 1 second, it was completely quiet. We were in the eye of the storm. One by one, people around me started disappearing. Some handlers took off running, some just dived into the grass. The guards were firing at something, but I couldn't see what. In a matter of seconds, I realized I was the only one left holding the catch-all for a fully grown lioness, staring me down. She could easily have torn loose and mauled me, but she was just as terrified as I was. At first, I thought I saw 3 logs wash up from the swamp. It took a few moments for me to realize that it was actually claws, reptilian. Something was dragging itself out of the swamp, moving big chunks of debris. It was covered in undergrowth, making it look like the wetlands themselves were moving around us. The night air was filled with wet mud. The birds had long since fled, leaving only me, the lioness, and the tapex. I couldn't see it clearly. It had an uneven amount of eyes, all moving in different directions, vibrating with excitement, larger than hubcaps, a mouth wide enough to swallow a car, teeth like a bison made for crushing. It reminded me of the Cheshire Cat, locked in a sinister smile. The lioness was slowly backing away, ready to strike. I'd long since dropped the catch-all and fell to my knees in surrender. There was no way to win against something like this. The tapex looked at me with every single eye, vaguely reflected in my abandoned flashlight. It didn't breathe. It was surprisingly quiet. Those big square teeth drew closer, only to effortlessly push me out of the way. Some sort of appendage extended from the creature's left side. I could hear several more appendages splash against the water surface. I heard the catch-all rattle closer as the lioness was pulled into the creature's maw. She put up a good fight, twisting and turning every inch of the way, but it was no use. Bones broke like twigs. Blood dripped from the space in between the bucket-sized teeth. A sudden quiet as the roars and growls of the lion stopped. I closed my eyes, barely noticing I'd long since pissed myself. I felt the teeth drawing closer. "Please," I cried. "Please!" To my surprise, it stopped. It was close enough for me to touch with the tip of my nose. The stank of mud and innards was immense, nearly making me gag. "We'll bring more," I stammered. "You'll get more." The tapex retreated without hesitation. It made a sound. It was not a grunt, a growl, or a roar. It was a calculated and trained sound made with great effort. More. It left. I cried. The survivors made their way back. It was done. They are intelligent. Long ago, we took away their natural habitat. We hunted their main prey to extinction. At some point, we must have fought them, only to realize that it'd be easier to keep them happy and well-fed. They could just eat us and multiply, but as long as we keep them fed and happy, they don't. Were we to stop, they would simply leave the enclosure and wreak havoc. In a way, they are not the captives. We are. This is an apex species just as intelligent, if not more, than we are. Those scratch-marked logs I mentioned earlier, yeah, those were scribbles. They have a written language. They live for thousands of years and only grow larger with age. We've tried to kill them, but they're immune to pretty much everything but high-yield explosives. Their intelligence allows them to coordinate and predict attacks. Remember those cutbacks I mentioned back in the 80s? Yeah, that was after an attempt to kill one of them. We lost a dozen people and they tore through 2 buildings, devouring every single lion we had. The repairs cost so much that the new management decided to completely abandon the idea. I've since been promoted to supervisor, surpassing the senior handler title completely. I have to go out with every feeding now. The Tapex might get upset otherwise. They even know my name. There are 3 of them in total, 1 adolescent and 2 younger. I encountered the youngest that night. I want to reach out to those who work at the other zones. If the Tapex feeds on lions, what feeds on tigers? Elephants? There is little to no contact between these zones, and the top brass are on a very strict need-to-know basis. I'm pretty sure they'd kill me if I tried going to the press, but posting anonymously online doesn't seem to bother them. Who's gonna believe some nobody on Reddit after all?
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man taking time off to himself is visited by a swamp monster. So, have you been fishing? And have you seen Melonhead?
Late last summer, I was going north for my brother's wedding. It was at the start of my vacation, so I decided to make a few stops on my way up north. I'd make a stop for camping, another for a day of fishing, and so on. My brother, who was stopping in Minneapolis, was pushing hard for us to have a day to go shopping together, and I was just not feeling it. He was all head in the clouds, in love, and talking about his blissful future, and it just soured my mood. How could my younger brother surpass me in so many different ways? Never mind. I was passing through a small Minnesota town when I decided to make my first stop. Fishing. That'd get me far from the blinding smile of my brother. It'd be just me, a 6-pack, and all the time in the world. Deal! There was a lake that ran through the west side of town and curled into the woods. There was a dirt road coming around the back of the lake, opposite of the town. It'd probably take an hour or 2 just to trek back to town through the undergrowth. It was a pretty big lake. The locals seemed friendly enough at the gas station, and you didn't need a license to fish, so I figured, hell, why not? So I drove the long way around, parked my car, got my gear, and dug along the tree line for bait. It didn't take long to fill up a jar. I followed the path down to the lake, bait in hand. It was almost lunchtime, and I'd gotten a few sandwiches and a 6-pack from a nearby gas station. I had this really comfy camping chair, an audiobook, and nowhere to be for the next 18 hours. Hell, if I skipped my Minneapolis shopping spree with Smiley McGee, I could stay an extra day out here. Also, this gave me an excellent excuse to just skip going there at all. Needless to say, I was psyched. As I walked up to the lake, I noticed a wooden sign, handmade and painted with a clear text, Melonhead. I stopped just to reread it a couple of times. Melonhead. What the hell was a melonhead? I took a picture of it and kept walking. As I got closer to the lake, I started hearing frogs. Like, a lot of frogs. There was this strong, intense smell of vegetation in the air. But as every good outdoorsman knows, frogs are basically a sign of a healthy ecosystem. Sure, in some environments they can be intrusive, looking at you, Australia. But that wasn't the case up north. I put up my camping chair on the beach. I took off my shoes and prepped 2 fishing rods. I put them into empty bottles that I dug into the sand so I could set them aside. I leaned back in my chair, cracked a cold one, and put a baseball cap over my face. As Will Patton started reading me the Bill Hodges trilogy, I completely zoned out. This was what I'd been working for all year. This was a proper vacation. I must have fallen asleep, probably for an hour or so. When I woke up, I'd completely lost track of my audiobook. My beer was warm by now, and my fishing bobbers had drifted all the way back to the beach. I got up, reeled in the lines, and reached for my bait, only to notice it was tipped over in the sand. Empty. Strange. I left my gear on the beach, got my shovel, and returned to the tree line. It took me longer to find bait this time, and I had to go a bit deeper. The frogs were a bit more quiet now, and there were a few clouds gathering on the horizon. I decided I wouldn't stay the night unless the rain passed me by. I didn't want to get stuck in a muddy tent overnight. I could sleep in the car, I suppose. As I got back to my camping chair, I got a bad feeling. Something seemed out of place. I wasn't sure exactly what, but it looked different. Something had been moved. Will Patton kept talking in my ear, but I was no longer hearing the story. By now it was just noise, like a friend who didn't know when to stop talking. As my phone chimed with a notification from my brother, I turned it off and took off my headphones. It took me a few seconds to realize that all the frogs had gone silent. I just stood there with my bait jar, hearing an eerie wind pass through the birch trees. I decided I'd give it another go. If it started to rain, I'd just sleep in my car. So I got back, threaded my bait, and threw my bobbers out one more time. I set my rods back up, put my headphones back on, and put away my lukewarm beer. As I brought up my phone and started rewinding the audiobook, I noticed a ripple on the lake. Not a big one, but a noticeable one. Probably fish breaching the surface. Maybe this wasn't a lost cause after all. Just a few minutes later, the first bobber dipped under the surface. It immediately came back up, but now I knew that fish were biting. Moments later, the second bobber dipped. I held my breath, waiting to see the bobbers dip for real. There were fish there, it was only a matter of time, but minutes passed and I got a strange feeling. I reeled in one of the bobbers and noticed the bait was completely gone. I reeled in the second one, and it was the same. Bait was gone. Very determined and skilled fish in this lake, definitely. I decided to try something different. I brought up my box of spinners and found a black and blue lure that usually worked on bass. My best rod had a spinning reel, so that'd work just fine. I set it up, stepped up to the edge of the beach, and threw it out. Solid, beautiful arc way into the lake. Half an hour passed, and I just got back into the rhythm. The click of the spinning reel, the smoothness of the line. It was nice. Just nice. Then, a bite. Not a big one, but a bite. Finally, I hooked it and started reeling. Not twitching, just a solid, steady reel. Probably not a big fish, about a pound at most. But now I had something to show. Would probably make a neat Insta post or something for my Tinder profile. Laugh at it if you want. It works. My lure was about halfway back when the line suddenly snapped. It wasn't even from the pressure. It was as if the line was just cut. The fishing line snapped out of the water. I just dropped my rod in the sand and threw up my arms. "What the fuck?" I yelled to myself. "What the fuck was that?" And there, out in the lake, another ripple. I had enough. I packed up my things, trudged back up to my car, and dumped it all in the trunk. Even the lukewarm beer. I left the bait jar in the sand, though. These worms were useless. By the time I sat down in the driver's seat, the first raindrops had started spattering against the hood of my car. Then my phone chimed. Of course, the third time my brother was asking if I would make it to Minneapolis tomorrow, I groaned out loud. I couldn't take that kind of toxic positivity. I just couldn't. I needed space. "Sorry," I texted back. "I just set up camp. I'm here for at least another day." So as to not make myself a liar, I decided I'd stay the night. I'd sleep in the car and just listen to my audiobook. That was a kind of camping, right? I had a tuna sandwich packed away, and my lukewarm beer was almost palpable. Not much of a dinner, but I didn't feel like going back to town. It felt more appropriate to just stay out in the woods. I put my headphones back on, turned off notifications, and let Will Patton creep back into my mind. As the clock crept later and later, my lukewarm beer was running out. About 9 p.m., after a long nap and checking my YouTube subscriptions, I had to take a bathroom break. The woods had gotten really dark, really fast. I didn't have to go far, so I just stepped out into the forest and did my business. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing. I could see the lake from there, and I noticed another ripple. It was bigger this time. I zipped up, walked back out on the dirt path, and took a second look. There was something in the lake. Nothing big, but something round, about the size of a basketball. I got back in my car and updated my Instagram. I was a bit pissy about not getting the fishing picture out of this trip, but hey, at least I got a picture of that weird sign. Maybe someone out there knew what it meant. So I took another look at the picture. I noticed two things. One, that round thing in the water can be seen in the background down by the lake. Two, there's a small spatter of color at the very top of the sign. It kind of looked like the sign was broken now that I looked closer at it. It gave me an idea. I took one more trip out of the car, following the dirt path. Now I could hear frogs again. They were getting louder. Probably the rain luring them out. Using my phone as a flashlight, I looked around the sign. Just as I suspected, there was a second part to it, just off the path. It had been broken in two. The text was clear. Don't feed. Don't feed Melonhead. What the... I started thinking about what I'd done all day. My bait jar going empty. Bait being picked from the hooks. My fishing line being cut. Had I been feeding whatever the hell kind of animal Melonhead was? I turned back to my car, only to see someone standing on the path. I didn't raise my phone. I didn't want to make any sudden movements. I just froze, like a deer in headlights. I could barely make out a humanoid shape, but I got this sudden realization that I was out, alone, in the middle of nowhere. And now something was blocking my path. It was tall, like 2 heads taller than me. It had sort of a hunchback, and these long, webbed fingers. It had this irregular breathing, rattling a large sack in its chest. It dropped my bait jar on the path in front of me. More. This awful gurgling noise. Somewhere halfway between a regurgitation and breathing in. I carefully picked up the jar and looked up. Whoever this was had this big melon-sized head. This was what I'd seen sticking out of the lake all day. It even had a tint of green. I need my shovel, I gasped. It's just... More! It stepped towards me with a splat. I fumbled backwards, tripping over my own feet. I crawled into the underbrush and just started digging with my hands. I stood there on my hands and feet, ripping into the ground with my fingers. Thick globs of something sticky dripped down as Melonhead loomed over. Every now and then I felt something wiggle between my fingers as I filled the jar with dirt and worms. I held it up, and Melonhead just poured it over its face. The dirt was filtered out and spat back out as the jar was dropped back down next to me. More! I must have dug for hours. Just as soon as I filled the jar, it emptied it. Hour after hour, I just dug, and dug. Breaking my nails, having my fingertips cut by little rocks and roots. I have no idea how long I was there. Hours. An eternity. Every time I slowed down, there was this sound like a man-sized rattlesnake getting antagonized behind me. I even stopped pleading. I just kept going. The rain intensified, drenched me, but I couldn't tell if my shivers came from fear or cold. At some point, when I held up the jar, it didn't take it. The sun was rising out of the dark clouds, and the frogs had gone quiet again. My knees crackled as I got back up, and my fingers were trembling. I was covered in dirt, and my clothes were soaked. There was no one there. I leaned against the closest tree, tried to find the right words, but instead just collapsed into crying. When I got back to my car, I plugged in my phone. As it charged, I called the one person I wanted there, my brother. I had to get away. I just drove, mindlessly. I have no memory of what I did or how I ended up at a gas station. I don't have the slightest idea how my brother found me there. I just remember being glad he did. It has taken me a long time to come to terms with what happened. For a while, I thought I'd had some kind of mental breakdown, thinking that what I experienced was just something I made up. I didn't talk about it. It sounded ridiculous to say out loud, but I really was there all night. I was on my hands and knees, digging. I wouldn't do that for nothing. I was there, and so was Melonhead. I decided to finally make this post after I found a couple of people posting a picture of that same sign on Instagram the other week. It was still broken in half, and right there in the background was that round thing bobbing in the water.